Imagine this. You have started your low carb journey. You just finished a healthy meal. You're making big progress. But a few minutes after that healthy meal, maybe up to half an hour, you start to feel tired, exhausted, foggy headed, sleepy. And then a little bit after that, uh, you even start getting hungry again. What's going on? Maybe you've had a CGM, a blood sugar on, and kaboom, you spiked through the roof. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this story, you may be shocked to hear that high blood sugar is actually way more dangerous than cholesterol for your heart. Today's show, we're going to start talking about hidden everyday foods. We did a video on this back when excuse me for itching my nose there, back when I had a friend named John Lorscheider who was helping me with the channel. We did a video called Stealth Carbs. And it's carbs that are secretly sabotaging your blood sugar, even so-called healthy carbs. And here's some of the places where you can find it. You might think, oh, you know what? I'm doing great with legumes. And then you find that some people will find that some legumes like, oh, Jesus, I'm blanking on the name of the legume that does that.
Lentils?
Lentils. Yeah, thanks. Lentils, for some people, can spike their blood sugar. And then there are those of us like myself who may still have a sweet tooth. I've done a great job in terms of just not eating the major source of glycemic carbs in the standard American diet. That is grain products. I don't eat rice. I don't eat breads anymore. I used to eat breads all the time. Back in my low-fat days, I ate a lot of breads, got a lot of carbs, a lot of calories from grain-related carbs. But again, I grew up in the deep South, South Carolina. So we used to go blackberry picking once a year. We'd make blackberry cobbler and have ice cream on top of that. We also had sweet tea multiple times per day. So yes, I've got that sweets addiction. And my family of origin gets together like once a week usually. My sister's a fantastic cook, and she loves to make the meal for our family. Sometimes she makes some great desserts, and sometimes I have some of that. Sometimes my blood sugar spikes. Sometimes I have to go back to the house and hop on the assault bike. And sure enough, I've had my blood sugar go up as high as 200 and get it down within 5 minutes on an assault bike. Now, you may say, what's the assault bike? Maybe that's not the right term, but I'll tell you what this is. This is a 30-year-old bike. And back in the day, we used to call it a Schwinn Airdyne. So again, you can have major opportunities for managing your blood sugar if you know what to do. And if you know where to look, you can avoid those stealth carbs and the spikes that we want to avoid. Jesus, you want to join us and talk about it?
Absolutely. So today's show, it's going to be, yes, about what are those foods that can spike your blood sugar, but especially those hacks, those tricks that you can do to minimize that from happening. Let's start with one, and then let's talk about today's riddle for those who are members of the channel or regular viewers of the channel. But we'll see the riddle later. Let's talk about hacks first. First hack, Dr. Brewer. So you mentioned exercise. Let's start with that one. So let's say you started eating something healthy, like some cooked carrots, right? Everybody knows carrots are healthy and you should be eating them. But when you cook them and you get rid of all the fiber surrounding the carrot, you're very likely to see a glucose spike, especially the older you get. I'm on my 30s, and I can tell you that I try to avoid eating some of those naked carrots without fiber on it because my blood sugar is going to go up. So that happens. Your blood sugar goes to, let's say, 140, 150. How do you apply the exercise part to that, Dr. Brewer?
So one of the most common things is taking a walk after dinner. I mean, it doesn't take an aggressive assault bike um, exercise. It doesn't take hill sprints. It doesn't take major weightlifting. It doesn't take any kind of high intensity work. Even just a gentle walk will slow down and take the head right off of that spike. Because what's happening is you're going for a walk, you're exercising the largest muscles in your body. And we've talked about muscles, especially muscles in your legs, being your best internal safety valve against the progression of metabolic disease, whether you've had it diagnosed or not. And you mentioned you're in your 30s and you were working with us for how long? A year
Uh,
and a half, 2 years?
Almost 3 years now, but yeah.
No, I'm talking
I,
about a year ago. You were working for us for 2 years in your 30s, in your head, intellectually knew all this stuff about undiagnosed prediabetes, but had you diagnosed yours yet?
I was dragging my feet. I knew it. I just didn't want to see the numbers.
You were in what we call denial,
Denial. Yeah.
not like anybody else is ever in denial about this issue.
Yeah.
But you had a great reason for being in denial. Your hemoglobin A1C was fantastic, wasn't it?
3.4.
3.4. How could you possibly have metabolic disease or diabetes with an A1C of 3.4?
Well, it turns out I have a generic variation of A1C, so it's never gonna go up.
Kaboom. So if you're sitting there listening to this and you've listened to your doctor and your doctor said your A1C is fine, I hope you heard that. A1C is not a great test for this. And it's not just me saying it, it's the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists. They've said it many times. Anyhow, I digress. You wanted to talk about
Not like you usually don't digress, right?
I never go in a bunny hole.
So yeah, and to me, like just doing squats works, but I think the older you get, the more intense the exercise probably is gonna need to be to have quicker results and put down that glucose spike. I even tried soleus push-ups or just raising your calves while sitting down. Uh, we were we were traveling yesterday with my wife, and we were at the bus station, and there's plenty of good stuff to eat on a bus station,
Oh
and
yeah.
I tried a low carb healthy bar that I found somewhere in there. I'm wearing my CGM right now, so the moment my glucose started going up to like 120, 125, I was telling my wife, watch this, I'm going to start just moving around my feet, exercising my calves, um and this is going to go down. And it did. I put it back down to somewhere closer to 90.
Well, there you go. So
So
these push-ups actually work, don't they?
yeah, so you're just sitting down and you just put your feet into your toes and go up and down, exercising your calves. That's it.
You're basically bouncing your knee even though you're sitting down. And there's been research which shows, I mean, people actually did studies on this to show that soleus push-ups will help you. Even if you think, okay, I'm in a bad spot here, I can't get up and walk, I can't do anything. If you're sitting down, you can still bounce your knee up and down on your toe.
Definitely.
And
So
that will improve your blood sugar.
yeah. So you mentioned this
As
this
demonstrated by Jesus with the bandaged finger.
Oh yeah, playing soccer. That's what happens. Well, interestingly, and Dr. Brewer knows this. I have a lot of work to do with my muscle mass. I was playing soccer and I showed him wearing my CGM. Even though I'm a goalkeeper, my blood sugar went up like to 170, and that's just a reflection of how much stored glucose I still have on my liver, and how much muscle mass I need to create to get rid of that. So it's not like, oh, exercising is going to spike your blood sugar. You're doing bad. No, you're going to burn those reserves of glucose that are just there sitting down, and you don't want them like that. Anyway,
Well,
anyhow, exercise. Yes.
tell us why you say that and why I said healthy leg muscles are your best defense against spikes.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question because we actually didn't mention this, and this is something you taught me. The muscles have different receptors for glucose, and most of the receptors on the muscle do not need insulin. So you can use the excess glucose that you have on your bloodstream without requiring that much insulin, which is the best way to lower glucose by far. That's what you need to do.
So in other words, what it sounds like you're saying is healthy muscles can bypass ailing insulin receptors.
Hmm. It doesn't matter if you have pre-diabetes or diabetes. If you have muscles and you have healthy muscles, you're working on those strong muscles. They are going to help you reduce those blood sugar spikes without the need of using insulin or too much
So
insulin.
when I take a carb vacation and eat like a coconut pie that my sister's made or something like that, and my blood sugar starts cranking up, I go back and I get on that assault bike and I start doing this real hard.
Yeah,
My muscles bypass my ailing insulin receptors and they just pull that sugar out of my blood and pull that sugar into those muscles where it's safe.
that sounds like a confession.
Well, there's a little bit of confession hidden there. As you know, I'm an addict. There's no question.
That makes two of us. So yeah, and that's the whole point. Now, this doesn't mean that you can just go on carb vacations every day. Uh,
I don't
Still,
do.
you're gonna get some damage from other stuff in there, not just the glucose. And even if you're able to put down some of that glucose is gonna be stored anyway.
Yeah,
You cannot outrun a bad diet. That's just the way
no.
it is. But we want to minimize the glucose spikes. Why do we want to minimize glucose spikes, Dr. Brewer?
The best evidence. So here's one thing that we know: high blood sugar and high insulin both can inflame the lining of the artery wall. And if you inflame the lining of the artery wall, that's when that LDL seeps past that inflamed lining and gets stuck between the lining and what we call the um, media, the muscle layer of that artery wall. And that's plaque.
Definitely. And just to clarify, because you're gonna see this out there, and there's evidence supporting this as well. It's not so much the glucose spike alone. Like if you have a glucose spike and then you use some insulin and put it back down, like that by itself is not a problem. The problem is when you're doing that repeatedly, or when you have a spike and you don't notice that you
Yeah.
have a spike and your blood sugar remains high. Like when you have a healthy breakfast of whole milk or low fat milk, if you want, with a bowl of cereal on an empty stomach, you absorbed all of those glucose, all of those carbohydrates, and they're going to spike your blood sugar. You're going to feel sluggish and slow and tired, just like Dr. Brewer said, sleepy afterwards. And that blood sugar is probably going to remain high for a while. The older you get, the more that you're going to be living with high levels of glucose in your bloodstream, high levels of insulin, and then that's when you get damage of the lining of the artery wall.
So great point. So if you consider like some of my ancestors, my father, some of my, neither of my grandfathers, but some other people in my family, um, especially males, getting a little bit too heavy as we get older. The classic thing is, oh yeah, he loves his food, he loves his dessert, loves his pasta, loves that bread, and so if instead of just having a little bit of splurge on that coconut pie, I would eat a whole bunch of um, spaghetti, for example, a plate full of spaghetti, the garlic bread to go with the spaghetti, a bunch of sweet tea to go with that, then the dessert, and maybe have two pieces of it because I love it so much. Not know that any of this was changing my blood sugar. My blood sugar would go up to 250, 300, 350 and stay there for hours after I went home and went to bed. The best evidence that we have is that the more time that your blood sugar spends over 140, the more you're inflaming those artery walls and causing plaque.
And that's what's important. And if you haven't noticed just yet, we already talked about a couple of foods that are thought to be healthy, just like cereal. We didn't mention oatmeal. Oatmeal can do the same. Oatmeal can spike my blood sugar up to 140 for sure if I let it.
Makes mine about 190.
Be careful on the food aisle from all of those that say low fat,
Yeah.
healthy foods, just because they're probably going to be going to have some added sugars, or even if they don't have added sugars, they may have a lot of carbohydrates within them, which can be a problem. So those are kind of the two types of food that you need to be careful. We have a couple of, yeah, go ahead.
Let me challenge you on that. But if you look at Quaker Oats oatmeal, it's got a little heart logo on it. And if you look at, especially at Honey Nut Cheerios, the logo for that is shaped like a heart, and they both say it's good for your heart.
Yep. Yeah, big fat lie.
Hey,
Anyhow,
really, are you calling the marketers of big food big fat liars?
oh yeah, they're. I don't think they are in behalf of the health of the population, right?
Well, tell me, how can they actually get away with that? How can they put that on their logo?
Well, the American Heart Association allows it. Well,
Why
they
does the
are
American
endorsing
Heart
them.
Association allow it?
Well, as far as I know, there's a lot of money coming in from different corporations into the association, right?
Well, let me go ahead and add what I'm digging at. So the bottom line is the American Heart Association has focused especially on cholesterol, LDL, quote, bad cholesterol, and has neglected to look at undiagnosed metabolic disease. Both of these carb sources, these grain sources like oatmeal and Honey Nut Cheerios, have been demonstrated to decrease cholesterol, LDL, quote, bad cholesterol, just a little bit. And again, I'm referring to a major debate in terms of, if you haven't spent much time on this channel, when you go out into the rest of the medical world, they'll tend to focus on LDL cholesterol and neglect looking deeply for metabolic disease.
Definitely. So we have more tips on how to avoid. This time it's going to be to avoid glucose spikes. But before we go there, we're doing a daily, well, every week riddle. So this is the riddle for today. If you want to help us read it.
I saw a member got it. I'm not going to say what it is until you do. I'm going to let you do that. Today's riddle is, I'm a shield. I'm soft as lace, though. I'm guarding rivers in their race. A sugar coat so fine, so thin, where life and flow begin. But when the sweet tide rushes high, I weaken, I fray, and start to die. Though unseen, my loss is dire. Jesus, you're not poetic enough. You didn't create that, did you?
Oh, of course, that came out of my mind.
So, as my mother would say, as she rolled her eyes,
So, if you said somebody already got it, well, I'm sorry. We put it that like what 2 seconds?
No, we got some smart people that watch this channel. There's no
quick reader and then got it. I haven't seen the results, so anyway, just so you know.
Read it to you?
No. Just let's bear with me. For every person who's new to the channel and for those who are regulars on the channel, Dr. Brewer just created a specific metabolic risk assessment kit. It's a kit that will allow you to identify if you probably have metabolic disease at home. Come on. And so members only and people based on the US for now. If a member doesn't get the answer, then we go to the person who's not a member who got the answer, and we're shipping boxes for free. That's the price for if you're able to solve the riddle. So for the person who solves the riddle, what we ask is just call the office 859-721-1414 and tell them you won, and they will make sure that you are able to get it. There's a process to follow, but yeah.
Gilbert,
we
if
will
you'll show that number on the, there you go.
we will talk more about the assessment kit later. And also, if you are not a YouTube member, well, a PrepMed channel member, Dr. Brewer's channel member, do what Harlan Bounce did. Just click on the join button next to the subscribe button on the channel, and you'll become a member. We'll be answering your questions first on the live shows like today. Okay, we'll talk more about the box later. Let's now go back to tips to avoid blood sugar spikes. What else can you do to avoid a blood sugar spike?
I know you've said we'll talk about the box later twice, but I have to say I'm obviously excited about it, and you know why. It's what we've been working on this for years. We've wanted to get this kind of assessment available to people without having to pay $1,000, $1,500, $2,000, $1,500, or even the $500 that you see in a lot of programs now. So very excited, and we're not the only ones. A bunch of people are getting very excited about this. We've had to slow down the marketing on it a little bit in order to keep up with demand. But okay, having said all that, I'll go back to your comment about what was your comment anyway?
Well, how to lower blood sugar spikes. Let's see that let's say that you go to you go have dinner to a good place where they sell ribs.
Yeah. Oh, another source of stealth carbs. You go there, you're saying, okay, you know what? I'm on a low carb diet, and the currently so popular carnivore diet. I eat nothing but meat products. And then you eat some ribs and your blood sugar spikes. Why would that happen?
Yep. Well, what do they put to the ribs? What do they add to it?
Sauce is full of sugar.
Very tasty.
Very tasty. And you know what? You're hungry and you're eating meat, so you ignore it. And yeah, sometimes you can get a little spike there.
Yeah. So what do you do? What can you do to minimize that or to avoid that? What can you eat before eating the ribs?
Well, eat before you eat ribs.
Well, or maybe I mean I have a couple of tips on my mind, but what's the one you have on your on your
I'm
mind?
just thinking of a story when you took me, or no, wait a minute. You took me to Terry Black's in Dallas. Even though you took me, I ended up paying for it.
Oh yeah.
When we got those big, like the cow's ribs with all that meat on it, it's really good. And we also got pig ribs. We also got, what else? Oh, we got a ton of stuff. And some people did make negative comments. They said, we showed that on the channel, and people said, "Oh, you're going to get a lot of sugar in that sauce." Now, I don't add sauce, and actually, I went back to my room, and my blood sugar did not do that badly. But I'm going to say, we talked about walking.
Yep.
You and I stepped out of Terry Black's when we finished, and we walked up and down. I can't remember the name of that neighborhood. It's well, maybe somebody will remember it. It's a new regenerated, stylish evening kind of neighborhood there in Dallas.
Yeah.
You remember the name?
No, I don't. Yeah, it was a nice place. What I was thinking more about is before eating the ribs, or better said, eating the sauce or taking the sauce. There are a couple of things that you could eat before you eat any carb that that's probably gonna raise your blood sugar, right? So there are three major components. You have a protein source, you have a fat source, and even a carbohydrate source to minimize carbohydrate absorption. So you can eat protein, you can eat some fat, or you can eat some fiber before that. And you can get fiber from, if you wanna be carrying some psyllium husk with you, or you can just eat some leafy green vegetables. I personally eat cactus. There's some pieces of cactus that cactus. We call that
like that would hurt.
no, but without the spikes, of course. But you go to your local Mexican uh, store and ask for nopales, which is a type of cactus. It's basically
I've had
only
some of that
fiber,
when I was in
and
Mexico.
that's great with some lime juice. So you can eat that. You can eat some leafy green vegetables. You can eat some fiber source. Fiber and protein are the most effective. You can eat that 5 to 10 minutes before eating your carbohydrate source, and or the carb that's gonna raise your blood sugar. Just do that, and it's gonna minimize the absorption. That's what a
Cool.
medication for diabetes does. Acarbose. If you have your
Hey,
if you never
carbos, yeah,
prescribe a carbose, you never prescribe it, and I don't either, because you can replace the effect of the medication with some of those foods.
yeah.
Fat can reduce blood sugar absorption, but it doesn't do that well.
Well, I'll go back to the to our trip to Terry Black's. You remember what I had? I got a bunch of green beans
Oh yeah,
that had butter and oil on them,
some
and that was my
asparagus, I
appetizer.
think as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are kind of quick, easy hacks that you can do if you really wanna eat some blood sugar. Just don't eat if you want to eat some sugar. Don't eat it on an empty stomach. And just if you're gonna have dessert, leave dessert to the very end, as it should be. No wonder mom and dad, grandma always let you know no dessert if you don't eat your dinner first, right?
When I
There's a
was a
reason
young
for this.
adult, I ate out a lot. I traveled with my work, and I used to eat dessert first. That was not good. That was
Yep.
before I started looking at my blood sugar.
Yeah. Well, I'm guilty. I'm guilty as charged. On my sweets addiction, even when I was at med school, I didn't have a lot of budget back in the day. I was on a scholarship. Um, what I could afford was some cereal, and with my sweets addiction, some cookies. So I used to put
Yeah.
the cereal and the cookies on it. Chocolate cookies. Can't you imagine? And I
Hmm.
just didn't know. I didn't know better. I
Cereal
was in
with
my
chocolate
first, second
cookies.
year of med school. Didn't know better. I wasn't being taught that. I would just knew that you should not be eating a lot of fatty foods. That's what I was taught as well. Avoid fatty foods because that's gonna kill you. Not a lot of emphasis on avoiding sugary foods.
Yeah. When I met Eric Westman, first time he and I talked, he said, "Oh, you were part of that Hopkins low fat army." I didn't know there was a low fat army there, but yeah, that was the reigning thing. We were just looking at calories in, calories out. Fat had the most calories. It's like 9 calories per gram, whereas protein and carbs are like 4. So obviously, fat had to be bad. And we really never thought about the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity or the metabolic oxidative inflammation model, either of those things, which are so important.
Yeah, for sure. Um, we haven't discussed what's the best way to minimize blood sugar spikes, and I haven't mentioned that because it's not the most popular thing to do for most people. I think for our audience, it's going to be obvious. But for people out there who are looking for minimizing diabetes, pre-diabetes risk, or they're dealing with their own sugar challenges every day, what would you say is the best way to minimize blood sugar spikes?
Well, it's actually an old common sense thing that I would say, and that is if you're in a hole, the first thing to do is stop digging. In other words, if you're number one, you test, don't guess. Don't I mean guessing like you were doing is really guessing and hoping is not a great plan.
Yeah.
You need to test and find out whether or not you've got the problem. If if you're saying, okay, well, I don't have the problem. I mean, you're saying I've got a 1 in 10 chance because 90% of us have at least some metabolic disease. So number one, be aware of that. Number two, then go ahead and test and make sure that you're in that 10% or you're 90% or less. I saw somebody make a comment on here. What's wrong with just assuming you have prediabetes and managing and eating accordingly? That's what most of the low carb community does. And I think that's very, very safe. But then I think, Jesus, you may have been getting to the next step of when you're in a hole, stop digging. And that is when you recognize that I'm at a level of insulin resistance right now to where if I drink a Jolitos or if I drink a Coke or if I eat some bread, it's going to spike my blood sugar. Realize that, the definition of a toxin is an exposure that damages your body. As we get more and more insulin resistant, carbs turn from just maybe a healthy macronutrient into a toxin. You have to manage it appropriately. And toxins are not something that you can always avoid. As you and I have, from your training, the toxicity is in the dose. So at the end of the day, don't eat enough glycemic carbs that are going to spike your blood sugar. Is that where you were going?
Yes. And I think you did a terrific segue. My point is avoid carbs. So doing a keto diet, even a carnivore diet, that's probably a good thing to do. You can do a plant-based diet that's gonna minimize some of that. If you really, really want to eat some carbohydrates, I think you said the keyword glycemic carbohydrates. Carbs that are more likely to raise your blood sugar. And there's two ways to measure that. You can do a glycemic index, or some people prefer the glycemic load assessment. Can you talk to us a little bit more about what's glycemic index, what's glycemic load?
Sure. Glycemic index is the amount that a food raises your blood sugar. And I'll give some surprising numbers. So white bread, it has a glycemic index of 70, about 70. And people say, oh, no, well, you want to eat whole wheat products because those are good for you. Whole wheat bread has a glycemic index of 60, meaning that it will raise your blood sugar about that much, 60%. And table sugar has a glycemic index of 50. So we're talking about glycemic index right now, and hopefully you're getting the surprise that, number one, bread is higher than sugar itself, to help people understand that grain products are a big deal, especially like Jesus likes to talk about, highly processed grain products. But even, quote, healthy whole grain products are not that good either. They're still higher. Probably the most commonly eaten whole grain is whole grain bread or whole grain pastas, and those raise your blood sugar more than sugar. So that's glycemic index. But the reality is, when you sit down to a meal, you don't have just bread. You don't have just sugar. You have a group of foods. Like Jesus was talking about, he eats those cactus thorns or the cactus, and then he'll eat.
Not the thorns. That would be painful.
The cactus without.
I won't be here.
Or when we went to Terry Black's, we ate green beans that had been cooked with butter. And so we had fiber and butter, so fiber and fat before we had, and then we had the fat of the meat, the animal meat, the cow's rib, all in together, and before the carb, the sugar that was in the sauce that Terry Black's cooks had put on that cow's rib meat. So the real question is not so much what's the glycemic value of that sauce. The real question is, and that would be the glycemic index of that sauce. What the real question is, what was the glycemic load that Jesus and I ate during that meal? When you combine the fat from the green beans, the fiber from the green beans, the fat from the butter, the fat from the animal meat itself with that carb. Now, I can tell you, Jesus got a lot more fat and meat than I did, because, he just went after that, and it's like...
You were paying. I should have. I wasn't going to miss that opportunity.
Yeah, you're very good at that.
So just for clarifying some other top aspects of this, if you're wondering, so what's healthy to eat? You can do just look at some charts on glycemic index and glycemic load. Our friend Mario Kratz from Nourished by Science on YouTube has on his website some cool charts that you can take a look at. Look for glycemic index foods of less than 55. That's the threshold. Or look for glycemic load of each food. Ideally should be less than 10. The way you calculate that is you get the glycemic index, multiply that for the amount, for the grams of carbohydrates on the portion you're eating, and divide that by 100. That's going to give you the glycemic load, and we prefer stuff that is less than 10. So that comes to the conclusion of, is everything poison? Well, it depends on the dose, right?
Right.
uh
Water
Eating
can
salt.
be poison at the right dose and the right, I mean, if you're drowning, that's water is a poison.
Yeah.
Oxygen can be poison. If you're a premature infant and your lungs are not ready for oxygen, oxygen can be a poison. And too much oxygen for adults can be a poison as well.
Yeah.
So
So
as you said, the poison is in the dose, the toxin's in the dose.
yeah. And if we have said this before, we recommend some fruits like berries or strawberries, which are high on fiber. But I don't think you should be eating 2 pounds of strawberries every day either.
Yeah,
Uh, that,
especially
that
some of the newer, sweeter strawberries.
that's
Same thing
gonna
with
be a problem.
you see that a lot with blueberries. People hear that, oh, you know what? They say it's okay for me to eat blueberries, and then they just go to town. They get, these big things of blueberries and, like a bear, just eat a giant bowl of them, and they get too much.
Yeah. I think the same thing happens with honey. The same thing happens with stuff like other fruits like apples, oranges, and stuff like that, where they have some fiber, but if you look at the glycemic index and glycemic load of each, you realize that you probably just cannot overeat any of those two. And I think the
Yeah.
second phase to identify this, it's going to be testing yourself. I tell you for a fact, my wife doesn't have the same insulin resistance problem that I have, and we
Yeah.
can eat the same stuff, even the same amount. She can eat as much as I eat. She won't get the same blood sugar spikes that I have. She just won't.
We tend to see that as a trend, men versus women. Women get into this insulin resistance problem later than most men.
Hmm.
And you see,
That's what I keep telling her. If you
yeah,
don't see a glucose spike, that doesn't also mean that. I mean, if it doesn't go over 140, but it goes like 115, 120, that doesn't mean that you don't have a problem. That means that you're pushing insulin, and insulin is
that's
still able to do the job. The problem is there's no way right now to measure insulin at home just yet. So you can have insulin resistance without glucose spikes. That what happens is you're pushing too much insulin. You just don't know, right?
yep, yep,
So that's kind of part of the conversation. So that's the tip. Identify what you're eating. Avoid carbs if you can. Unhealthy carbs, glycemic carbs, as Dr. Brewer said. And what are glycemic carbs? Any glycemic carbs any carb that has a glycemic index or more than 55, or a glycemic load or more than 11. Those are glycemic carbs. And there's another tip that I was thinking about. We did a couple of videos recently about one of your favorite superfoods, quote unquote, apple cider vinegar.
Oh yeah, we ran out of apple cider vinegar. We're going to. I think Cindy's going to get it today.
Yeah. Uh,
I love to
one
hate on that. In the old days, I thought, oh, that's silly. Not anymore.
No, and there's plenty of evidence, and I think any vinegar will do. Well, any
Yeah,
vinegar that you can consume probably is gonna do. But most research is on apple cider
apple
vinegar,
cider. Yeah,
and just doing 2 tablespoons on your food. I do that on my salads with some olive oil, and that's what I usually eat. I have a salad with olive oil, some apple cider vinegar, and some lime juice. Then I have some meat, and if I want some dessert, sometimes I can just have that afterwards, and my blood sugar won't spike that much. I know that you can still build some body fat if you're having dessert too often, though. So
yeah.
you have to keep that in mind.
So to your point about my diet a few minutes ago, I tend to stay ketotic maybe 4 to 6 days per week. Um, so, and my glycemic carbs, I tend to keep 20 to 40 and sometimes zero per day.
Yep. So we mentioned then, so just adding some apple cider vinegar. You can do supplements like berberine, so they're probably going to
Mhm.
help as well. But I don't think they're going to help like immediately. Metformin can help, but I don't think that's going to help immediately as well. Uh, what doctors do to manage this, especially in people with type 1 diabetes and uncontrolled diabetes, you know what they use to lower
Insulin
blood sugar spikes? Insulin. And that's something we're
drug.
not recommending. We're
Uh,
not recommending that.
if your doctor's giving you insulin, I mean, you got to listen. Well, I won't say that. Insulin is a bad drug. It is a very, very bad drug. It if you have questions about the efficacy of insulin, read that new book by Gary Taubes.
Hmm.
It's a great discussion of how in the beginning doctors had the right idea about glucose. It was called Banting. Banting was a fellow, one of the original low carbers, and basically they said, look, the carbs are hurting you. Let's just take carbs out of your diet.
Yep. And
And, and then insulin. Go ahead.
there's a place where I use insulin, injected insulin, in very very specific patients, and are these patients that have blood glucose of over 400,
Yes.
300, 400. They're clearly in a situation where the side effect of insulin building a little bit more fat is not as bad as not lowering that blood sugar, because they are basically just waiting to go to the ER at some point. So they need some drastic measurements and measures, and that's where I probably will use insulin, but not on your person who has uncontrolled diabetes with blood sugars of 200 that are not feeling anything just yet. Maybe they have some other complications of diabetes. Using insulin on them, probably, usually what it does is, if they manage to lower their blood glucose, they're just going to keep eating whatever they want to eat, and they're just going to keep on the bad trend, and they just hope that insulin is going to fix the problem, and they're going to be on that roller coaster and end up on a worse shape than they could be.
Yeah.
But
So
that's the way it is right now for medicine out there.
unfortunately, way too many docs are just used to throwing insulin medications,
Yeah.
and medications often hurt. Insulin has a lot of really bad side effects. You know, when you're talking about these blood sugars, 400, 400 to 700 and even above, you have to, number one, more often those are type 1. It's an inability to make insulin, or very severe level 5 type 2 diabetes, where the pancreas is just worn out and can't make more insulin. Um, when people have those really high levels, you have to start thinking about ketoacidosis, in which
Yeah.
case, yes, that can be life-threatening. And that's really more of a hospitalization, intensive care type of issue. That's
Yeah.
not a preventive issue day to day.
And actually on the ER, they don't use that much insulin. Just start by hydrating the
Yeah,
patient,
making sure
fasting,
they have good
hydrating.
potassium, because
And,
when you start adding that insulin to these blood sugars, that goes into the cell, and you're going to start losing potassium, and you want to make that can kill them quicker.
and that's the other tip. Just keeping yourself hydrated, drinking lots of fluids can also minimize the glucose spikes. But not a lot of people will tolerate drinking too much fluids. If you can exercise and then replenish your fluids and electrolytes after that, that's going to be a good combo to minimize blood sugar spikes.
Exactly.
Hydrating and that. I have one question for you before we move on to the riddle answer and the winner, and then the Q&A. What's your opinion on resistant starches? What is that, and how can that help minimize glucose spikes?
There's no question that resistant starches exist. And a lot of people will say, you know what, I'll just take my bananas green, and green bananas are more resistant starch have more resistant starch than brown bananas. A lot of people will say, you know what, I fix my rice, I make it. In the South, we fix it. We don't make it, we fix it, as if it were broken. But They make their rice and then they put it in the refrigerator for a couple of days. They do that with other starches as well to create what they call resistant starches, which are supposed to not spike your glucose. Sometimes that works. Quite often it doesn't. The bottom line is there's a simple way to just bypass all of that debate and uncertainty, and that is eat to the glucometer. Check your blood sugar. See what that quote resistant starch is doing. See if it's actually working.
Yeah. To me, I think it can help. Some people really like to eat some rice. They really want to try some of those types of carbohydrate foods, and they will just put it on the fridge for maybe 24 hours and they will eat it afterwards, kind of a little bit more cold. And that can help. But I agree with you. Overall, I will probably not do them. And it's about a matter of testing yourself. So let's go now to the riddle answer. See who won the free metabolic risk kit this time. This is the riddle. I'm a shield yet soft as a lace, guarding rivers in the race, a sugar coat so fine, so thin, where life and flow begin. But when the sweet tide rushes high, I weaken, fray, and start to die. Thought unseen, my loss is dire. The answer is the glycocalyx. Want to talk about the glycocalyx for a moment?
Yeah, I do. So thank you so much. There's actually go back. So the glycocalyx is the intima is the cell lining, and then that glycocalyx is a sort of a hairy substance that sticks back out the into the bloodstream. It reminds me of those of you who have some environmental thoughts or background. It's like a marshland. That's where a lot of the biological processes occur. Here in the capillaries, that's where oxygen is dropped off. That glycocalyx in a capillary, if you take an electron micrograph, you'll see that the red blood cells are actually bigger than they are in this comparative study. They're so big that they get lined up like this, one after the other, and get squeezed through the capillary. These hair-like glycoproteins, and glyco means sugar, so that's where we'll talk about that in just a minute. Those hair-like glycoproteins brush against the rim of these red blood cells, pull that oxygen out. Meanwhile, those hairs are helping the cells that they touch dump waste products back in. We talked about things like nutrients, carbon dioxide, and oxygen. So they pick up oxygen, they dump the carbon dioxide back out. They pick up nutrients and they dump waste products back into the bloodstream to be cleaned away. Now, I mentioned, go back to the wording just a second. A sugar coat. See that third line? A sugar coat so fine, so thin. That's glycocalyx. Glyco means based out of sugar. And some people like me, can't help but come up with theories. And one of the things that we find is whether sugar is high for too high or too long, or insulin is high for too long. It tends to damage this glycocalyx. In fact, if you look at electron micrograms, it'll look like somebody came along with one of those big lawnmowers and just cut this stuff out. And then the body, the capillary wall, the intima has to regrow that glycocalyx again for you to get metabolically healthy in that space. That's why I go in, these people that we described earlier, you're not aware of your insulin resistance, your prediabetes, your diabetes. You eat a whole bunch of rice, spaghetti, sweet tea, sugars. Your blood sugar goes up to like 200. Well, meanwhile, and it stays there like for 6 or 8 hours while you're digesting it that night. Meanwhile, it's just taking a lawnmower to that glycocalyx. You do that night after night after night. and that intima gets injured, and the LDL, yes, there is LDL in this, the small dense LDL and the oxidized LDL then passes through that intima layer. It gets stuck at that point. It won't pass through the medial layer, the muscle layer of the artery, and that is what we call plaque. Your immune system recognizes that that shouldn't be going on, so it does what it usually does. It attacks it. It releases enzymes and tries to dissolve it. That is that's what we call soft plaque, inflamed plaque.
Fantastic. It's good that we have it on recording. Great explanation. Blood pressure can damage that as well. But we also realize there's way more people with metabolic disease than there is people with high blood pressure.
No question.
Rick Folia, congratulations, our friend Rick Folia. Very smart guy. He got it right. So call the office, 859-721-1414. If you can put the number somewhere in there, Gilbert, just let them know you won so they can ship the box for you. This is what you get if you get the kit: a grip strength test or a glucose tolerance test that you can do at home, putting some glucose on your body to identify if you have this problem or not, body fat measurements, and coaching session to go through your results. We have a debut price of $169.5 or $119.99 for any additional packages. If you buy one, the second, third, fourth one is going to be cheaper. We're going to put a link on the description of the video, and when the stream ends at the end, on the pinned comment, you also have a link in there to go there and get your kit as well. Test at home. If you don't want to go to the lab, if you don't want to spend time there going through all these tests or getting some tests that are probably not going to be helpful, just not doing fasting glucose and not just doing A1C, doing something like an oral glucose tolerance test at home that you can follow along and see if you're having these spikes or not. They're going to tell you if you have metabolic disease. And grip strength, which is probably one of the best or the best way to predict longevity, especially in people over 40, 50 years old. You're as strong as your grip strength is. So you want to add something to this, Dr. Brewer?
Sure. As you know, as we're getting deeper into this, number one, this is something that I mentioned. I'm very excited about providing it because I come from a public health background and a Christian background, and one of my major focuses is trying to help people recognize undiagnosed metabolic disease, the stuff that's killing and disabling them. So I was sitting in a weekend seminar one time. It was like $2,000, but it was really good information. It was the Bale-Donine information. It's a little bit more standard medicine than we are now, but it was very, very good information in terms of prevention. And I was thinking, there's a new thing called YouTube, and I bet there are people out there somewhere who would really love to get this type of information. So that's when I started providing it. And sure enough, we've reached tens of millions of people at this point on the YouTube, the free content. Now, one thing that always bothered me is that people would get very interested, and they would come to see us and want to be seen in terms of getting full labs, spending time with myself. We had to hire other providers, licensed medical providers, to help handle the increasing demand. But it always bothered me because it was like a significant portion. Most people, when they would call and they would find out how much it costs to see a provider and get all that lab testing, they'd say, gosh, they were used to paying $25 copay to see their doctor, and they'd just say, I'm sorry, I can't do it. And we always kept thinking, is there a way to, we knew that you really don't have to have a lot of fancy lab tests. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time with a highly paid medical provider, a doctor, a nurse practitioner. There's some very, very practical things that you can do to find out, do I have metabolic disease? Because it gets back to one of the comments that I saw on here already. Why don't you just assume that you have metabolic disease? Because 90% of us have at least some of it. That's very safe, and you should do that. And most folks in the low carb community just recommend that you do that. I mentioned Eric Westman. We've had Ken Berry on the show, Sean O'Mara, Dr. Boz. We've had a ton of people on the show, and most of them just say, just assume that you're metabolically unhealthy, and that helps. But a lot of people sit there and they watch this and they say, I don't know. They're like Jesus for the first 2 years in our channel, where he was saying, maybe, I'm 30, maybe my A1C is but way below 5. Maybe I don't have it. And meanwhile, you're sustaining damage. You don't feel the damage. You don't feel the nerve damage that happens. You don't feel the damage to your eyes that's happening. And you don't feel that increasing risk for heart attack and stroke or Alzheimer's. So again, that's not a great way for the world to live. That's why we live in a world where we just assume that it's natural, that you could be, once you hit your 50s and 60s, and sometimes even your 40s, you can just have a heart attack and die, and find out that you have heart risk by dying. 50% of people that have a heart attack die with that's their first symptom. You don't get a second chance to do that. And so it continued to frustrate me that people felt like they had to get really high-tech solutions. We medicalize everything. You're beginning to see that when you look at other things too, like some of the competitors that we have out there now, like Vibrant Labs could be one. Dave Feldman is sort of, he's a friend of me. He's a competitor, but a good friend. Mark Hyman with Function Labs. They have these things where they offer labs, but you have to figure out and diagnose yourself. And these, again, typically $500 kind of numbers. For less than half of that, you can get a great, reliable diagnosis of your risk of heart attack and stroke. And again, it's not that we don't have anybody working with you to help interpret it. That's the other problem with the lab groups. You just get some written reports. You don't really get to ask it questions. With this program, you get to ask questions from highly qualified people. So, we do have the labs. We have the high-level Quest labs. We have the home simpler OGTT with Vibrant. But this is so practical, so easy. And again, so many people are starting to say, hey, this is a great idea. Let me try that.
Yeah, and Vibrant doesn't have the oral glucose tolerance test, Dr. Brewer. Like, that's the one thing you can do some at-home tests with Vibrant, but they don't do the OGTT, which is for us, we know it's not a fun test, and you don't want to go there and sit down on the lab for 2 hours or 3 hours like I did and Dr. Brewer does. Sometimes that's necessary because you can only measure insulin if you do it that way. But if you don't want to measure insulin just yet, you just want to do it at home, relax on the comfort of your house, this is a good way to do it. Anyhow, I failed again, as usual, to keep us on the, below the 1 hour mark. We have a lot of questions that I would like to go through as well. So why don't you give us the $35 water bowl, Gilbert, please? So Richard Militello, good morning. Good morning from Northern Arizona. Ruben O. Ruben. This is a good question for you, Dr. Brewer. He's trying to get you to get on a discussion with Dr. Bigman. I noticed a much more significant glucose spike after eating carbohydrates following a very low carb consumption period. So I will have to side with Dr. Bigman on this one.
Ruben, I'm not going to argue with you. And I'll actually tell you, of the groups in low carbers, one of the guys that I listen to the most is Ben Bigman. I've actually asked Ben a couple of times if he would come on the show. I'd love to have him. He's got some great academics. He's not a doctor. He's not seeing patients on a regular basis. So there's a lot of things that I think creates some difference between me and Ben. This is one of the areas. We haven't seen a patient yet. You may be the first that we've seen that has a big change in your insulin sensitivity based on how many carbs you're currently eating. We just haven't seen that with our patients. And how many OGTTs do you think we've done, Jesus?
I don't think I have seen a practice that does as much as OGTTs as you
I
do.
mean,
Not even
thousands.
gynecologist.
With thousands.
Yeah.
We have what, a dozen a day, and we've
Yeah.
been doing this for years. So, um, I, what
And
can
I
I
think
say?
I think this is the critical piece for this conversation that we haven't been able to address correctly. You said big change. So
Yeah.
it is true that after a period of low carb and then you start eating some carbs back again, you're gonna have a little bit more of a higher spike because you don't have that much insulin. You have not been storing that much insulin. You have not been producing that much insulin because you don't need that much. The thing here is what we're saying is, for an oral glucose tolerance test, that doesn't matter that much because it's not such a big change to affect the results significantly. That's what we're saying. If you have a spike, doesn't matter if you're carb loading or not. It just doesn't matter if you're on a low carb diet or not. You do have a problem. That's what we're saying. That's the whole point. No,
Hey,
our
Sus.
friend John Palm. Hey,
Oh,
friends, thank you for
John.
all you do. I appreciate you. Yeah, it's good to see you, John.
Good to see you, John. Appreciate that. Hey, Sus, you're probably not going to want to cover this one. This is from a non-member. It's a fellow that's been a patient, and he sounds frustrated that we're not going to be able to continue the Medicare program. Can I take a minute?
I'll let you handle that.
So, Hal, it hurts us too. I spent a lot of time in prevention. Your typical standard, what we call traditional Medicare, was a reimburse the doctor for whatever he or she wanted to do and just try to restrict it to save money. Medicare then came up with a great program called Medicare Advantage, which was much more of a preventive program. I worked with some very large groups like Physician Partners of Florida and was their chief science officer to help move this needle in terms of prevention with large populations of people. When Medicare started saying, okay, we will take telemedicine, they still were not allowing telemedicine to set up for Medicare Advantage, but we thought we hoped we could sustain it. It looked like it was going to happen over the next year or two. Instead of making Medicare Advantage available to groups like us that were available throughout the country, Medicare Advantage reversed. And in fact, over the past couple of years, Medicare Advantage has retracted. And there's now even talk about not even reimbursing at all for folks that are getting telemedicine Medicare. At the end of the day, we tried. We knew we were going to get losses, financial losses, until things changed for the positive, but they changed for the negative. We lost money on every Medicare patient that we saw for about 2 years, and then have had slowly to back out and say, given the way we're set up, this practice cannot continue to see Medicare patients. I regret it. It hurts, but that's the reality, Hal. Sorry.
And we're working on a health coaching program that's a little bit more affordable, just so you know. Shout out to Facts or Truth, $2 super chat. Thank you so much. Those go a long way. I hate talking about money. It's so necessary and so frustrating. Anyhow, that's the way it is. Peggy Douglas, Soleus exercise. Yes, those Soleus push-ups. Those are wonderful. I love doing those, especially because Dr. Brewer is too cheap to buy me a standing desk, so I need to use a chair anyway. Richard Militello.
This is the guy that doesn't talk about money. Yeah.
I had supposedly low-carb protein powder shake 2 weeks ago. I had to sleep for about 45 minutes afterwards. It was pea protein. Yeah.
Be careful. One of the most common things that we see for our patients that are full keto, you'll start. It's one of these. It's sort of like the quote stealth carbs. It's not a carb, but your body can turn protein into carbs, into sugar, quicker than it can turn fat into sugar. And you'll hear folks like Jason Fung talk about, oh, protein will spike your insulin. It can, and it can actually even be turned into carbs, sugars. And it's one of the most common ways for somebody that's, quote, keto, to lose their ketosis. Be afraid of, even if it's pure protein, if it's highly processed, that's that thing Jesus keeps talking about over and over and over again. Be afraid, be aware of highly processed foods. Now, I know very much the debates about how much harder it is for old people like me, 67, to get enough protein. And I actually do use a little bit of protein powder in my coffee in the morning with coconut oil and some other fats. And I am able to maintain ketosis, but be aware and be concerned and cautionary about protein powder.
Yeah, it's hard to get a good source. Even with the challenges behind it, I use some whey protein with and put some creatine on it. It doesn't raise my blood sugar, but it's hard to get like the best option for protein powder. It's not so easy. This is a good question. Take ADCR. Using Stelo again, have noticed that walking after consuming carbs will mute the glucose rise, even starting to drop. But 5 or 10 minutes after ending my walk, glucose starts to rise again. What do you think is going on?
Absolutely. I've seen the same thing myself. Well, think about it. If you've got a belly full of carbs, you go out, it's starting to empty from your intestines into your bloodstream. You go out and walk, then those muscles of your legs are pulling that sugar out of your bloodstream. How many hours does it take to digest that meal? If it's going for 2 or 3 hours, you got to be walking for 2 or 3 hours, because that continues to dump into your bloodstream, which gets to Jesus's original point of just be careful how many carbs you're putting inside your stomach.
Yep. The older you get, the harder it gets. I can get away with a couple of squats. I think I did. I'm gonna. You did your confession on that coconut pie. I'm gonna give my confession. We went to an Italian restaurant 2 days ago. I got a steak, and for dessert, I couldn't resist a piece of brownie. It was fantastic. It took me 100 squats to lower that glucose.
So you know what I picked up out of that story? You'll actually even order steak when you're paying for it.
Oh yeah. Well, let me tell you something. It was a nice restaurant. You need to come to Mexico if you haven't come over here. I think it was like $15 for a big piece of steak, and it was good.
I'm trying to get Cindy to come down there with me.
Yeah. Robert Pinsky, what do you think of using a weighted vest when doing squats and walking to build up leg muscles? Will it be enough to increase insulin sensitivity during non-exercise parts of the day?
Well, a couple of things to think about, Rob. Number one of the things that we want is to improve our mitochondria. And the strength of muscles is where you're working on mitochondria. I use a 40-pound vest. You can do this with a 10-pound vest. This is very, very helpful work. And people talk about, you lose a lot of muscle when you use GLP-1s, the Ozempic and the other thing. Anytime you lose weight, whether you use GLP-1s or a drug or anything else, you're going to lose leg muscle. If you don't believe it, do exactly what Robert Pinsky's talking about. Lose 30 pounds or just pick up one of these vests and start walking around with it. You'll see why you lose muscle. It's because you're not exercising those legs like you did when you were carrying that 30 pounds 24 hours a day.
Yes.
Now,
that's fantastic. Yeah. Continue.
So the other thing to think about is, where do the insulin receptors live, and where is the intersection between your bloodstream and those muscles? It's in the capillaries. So how do you regrow capillaries? We lose capillaries as we get insulin resistant. There's no question about that. The most effective way of doing that is high intensity interval work. In other words, starving that muscle of oxygen. In other words, getting intense work where you're going. So yes, you can do that while you're walking with a weight vest, but usually you have to go up a heavy hill or walk fast to do it.
Fantastic. And I just ordered mine. weight vest for
Good.
me. Took me long enough
Mine's down
after
in the
after all
garage.
the denial.
I tell
No,
you
no,
what, like you said, I mean, I'm really glad to hear that for you because again, you need some more leg muscle.
yes, absolutely. And going back to playing soccer has helped me a lot. Has plenty of benefits. Had some side effects, but that's just
There
the
you
way the
go.
sports work.
Oh, Jesus, I keep telling Jesus we've got to get him telling his story more about having been invited into the Mexican soccer team and
Yeah.
show your other finger, your other soccer injury.
Oh, okay. Yeah. This is my bad. I didn't manage this properly back in the day, but I had a crooked finger over here because of playing soccer. This was just a sprain, but this was a dislocation and fracture.
Yeah, this was from basketball. Same thing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you
It's
shouldn't try to catch balls that are coming at you too fast.
yeah. I'm not showing the middle finger, just so you know. It's
Yeah,
I'm
let's
not
look.
showing that off. It's just yeah. But it wasn't a goal,
There you
which is
go.
good, isn't it?
You saved the goal.
I
That's
saved the
what's
goal.
important, right? You had to give up a finger, but you saved
Yeah.
the.
No goal. Donald Davidson, are plant protein powders more likely to spike blood sugar than whey protein? And what are your thoughts about casein, and bone broth protein as far as blood sugar impact? That's a great question. I would love to hear from you. What do you think?
I think I'm going to disappoint
Oh,
because I don't have much of an opinion. I've clearly seen. I mean, you can't do what I do without having heard this debate about whey protein or animal sources of protein being more accessible and usable than pea protein or the plant sources. I got it. I understand that. Do I see it clearly in evidence? I haven't seen evidence that just makes that completely the case. I do. I have used some pea protein. The other one about casein, I use a lot of bone broth, a whole lot of bone broth. So
yeah,
I don't have an opinion. I've seen some of the stuff about casein. I haven't seen enough to form a strong opinion.
yeah. To me, it's more like the oxalates conversation, where even though oxalates can be a problem for some people, then everybody's saying oxalates are bad for everybody, which I don't. I personally don't think that's the case. I think this is a very individualized decision, and some people will tolerate pea protein, some people won't, just like we saw in the other comment. Wakas Kureishi, I stopped eating wheat refined carbs. My diet nowadays is chicken, eggs, chickpeas, broccoli, sprouts, and vegetables. Recently, I have done what is what's BW?
I don't
Blood
know.
work. Blood work.
Oh, maybe
My
that's
my A1C dropped 5.8 to 5.7. I have mild fatty liver. I wouldn't be too disappointed with an A1C doesn't showing that much of a change. I'll probably will just refer more to fat loss and muscle gain, and we test for other stuff like inflammation and as we mentioned, the oral glucose tolerance test. So yeah, A1C can take some time to change as well. So, and some people won't put in that low either. And 5.7 is not such a bad number either. So, what do you think?
to Wakas's next question. I'd say again, uh, manage those glycemic carbs. Start, continue to decrease those. Continue to increase uh, healthy fats and some protein, non non processed protein.
Yeah, I think
And
there are
don't
other markers more than just A1C to follow. That's my point. Yeah,
Yeah. And don't forget exercise. Again, get healthy lower body muscles with healthy mitochondria and healthy capillaries.
yeah. So Justin, just wanted to mention this. Justin King, on the description of the video, click on view more. There's going to be a link in there. And once the stream finishes, we're going to have a link on the pinned comment if you want to take a look at the kit. Richard, I haven't had the same spike when whey protein powder. Yes. So it's just about testing. Rick Folia mentioning cutting carbs, added sugars, just those stealth carbs, which is basically what you mentioned as well, Dr. Brewer. Alcohol, that's another major one we didn't mention. Alcohol, for sure. Alcohol can be a problem. Alan Turner, I agree with how a little background information will be helpful. Does it apply to patients or just Medicare?
We have slowly been backing out of Medicare through this practice. Some of the big states, California, Texas, I think went earlier, and now some of the other states are going. We've got, I think, about 20 patients right now that are still in Medicare that are getting notices.
But it's just Medicare. You're still taking concierge
Yes. Yeah.
patients. Donald Davis
I'm
and
still
Glyco.
able to take Medicare, with some of my consulting work with some of the other companies that we work with. It makes sense to use Medicare, but just not this practice.
Donald Davis and glycocalyx, but I think somebody beat me to the punch. Yes, Rick Folio was just too quick. Starting using Stello again after tracking glucose after CMT shows some heterogeneous plaque in one of the carotids before bifurcation 1.4. So some plaque. It makes a lot of sense to start using a CGM to identify all of that. Wakas, how much stress contributes towards diabetes sugar spikes? That's a great question. What's the role of stress on glucose spikes?
You're asking me?
Yes.
As you know, we're starting to, that's an area that we haven't really covered that much in the past, and we're starting to add a lot more content in that space. So stay tuned, check out some of the pre-recorded videos that we're doing. At the end of the day, cortisol is a hormone that is released by stress, and it drives blood sugar. It forces your kidney to start cleaving all that glycogen and spitting those glucose molecules that glycogen's made of into your blood sugar. So it's really hard to back your body off from the fight or flight principle and decrease your blood sugar. The whole mental health thing is something that we will be talking about. Depression and its twin brother or its brother, anxiety, are both really, really comorbid, meaning they tend to happen a lot with prediabetes. So even if you have undiagnosed prediabetes, you need to be thinking about, have I suffered with stress? Have I suffered with anxiety, depression? Those are really big deals. We'll talk more about them over the next few videos.
Fantastic. And I think this is going to be the last question for today. Ruben O. We haven't mentioned this. We haven't really covered this. I wanted to cover this with a friend of ours that we met on San Diego, which I haven't been able to reach. A doctor who is specialized on blood vessels. If cholesterol causes plaque, how is that plaque is absent in veins and rarely found in the arteries of pulmonary circulation?
You're asking me?
Yeah, do you have an idea about that?
I always have an idea. You want me to give it?
Yeah.
So look at the anatomy of veins and even arteries in the pulmonary system, and you see that the anatomy is totally different. You don't have the muscle components in those vessels that you have in arteries. Why is that? Because they're pressure. The venous pressure and even arterial pulmonary artery pressure is what? Pulmonary artery is more than venous, and pulmonary artery gets up to what, 20? Mm-hmm. Whereas your arterial pressure goes to 120 over 80. I mean, that's what those numbers are. So when you're running around with 5 times or 10 times or more the level of pressure, you build up major media or muscle covering. And that major muscle covering is what stops that cholesterol from separating out even further.
Yeah. So you have both the metabolic damage on the lining of the artery wall, and then you have the mechanical damage. There's no surprise when you do a carotid intima media thickness test, a CIMT on your neck to see if you're building plaque. The bulb, which is the place where the common carotid artery becomes internal and external, it is the bifurcation where it splits in two. That's where most plaque is going to be built up because of the mechanical uh, um, impact of the blood flow within the layer of the artery wall. Yep. All
I
right.
mean, I saw somebody mentioned yoga and meditation.
Oh
Both
yeah.
of them shown significant evidence to decrease stress. Again, stuff we'll talk about in terms of stress management a little bit later.
Yep. All right. So thank you so much for taking the time. Again, the kit link is going to be on the description of the video or on the pinned comment if you want to give it a try. Congratulations to Rick Foley again. We'll be looking forward to see you again next week. We're starting to post some shorter videos on Monday as well, if you want to take a look at them. And this Saturday, we're going to be kind of a recycling. We think not enough people watched that interview we had with Dr. Lustig. So I think that's going to be a good one that you really don't want to miss.
That's
So
right. He covered so much stuff about the four mechanisms of obesity that most people just don't talk about. Great
yep,
discussion,
yep,
but there were some technical challenges and people just didn't watch it.
yep.
So we're going to make it much clearer, much cleaner.
All right. So looking forward to see you again and see you next week as well. Take care.